How you doing, guys? Today I want to do a video on self-defense, and more specifically what I would call a self-defense progression, or at least the myth of self-defense progression and the categories of self-defense now, and what some different things you could use. I'm not going to get into exactly why you may need to defend yourself. I'll leave it up to the what-ifers to tell you that and come up with all sorts of ludicrous scenarios, because according to them, I'm going to need to defend myself just because I put videos on YouTube showing that I have some material possessions of beans that I'm going to have to like defend my homestead against a raving band of biker lunatics who's going to break in and mouth rape me while they eat my beans and then burn my house down. But so anyways, I'm not going to get into why you may need to defend yourself or why I may need to, but I did want to get into the topic of self-defense, and specifically what I would call self-defense progression, like I mentioned before. And there's all sorts of things you could use to defend yourself, like a gun. That's a fan favorite. Always got knives. Of course, we got pepper spray. You could have a badass mace. Not bad for home defense. Even something simple like a Kubotan, or maybe even a pen that has a high impact thing on it, or a bezel of a flashlight that's designed for high impact. And that's sort of what I wanted to get into, is if you took all these things that I mentioned, like the flashlight bezel, the Kubotan, the pepper spray, you could probably list them in an order of like which one you would more likely have in a self-defense situation, starting with like unarmed hands, moving up to a slight impact weapon, you know, like the pen or the Kubotan, then maybe going to the pepper spray and then the knife. And I sort of drew that out here, just a brief description. And while most people would look at this, I just used the basic categories of like stun gun, pepper spray, knife, and then an actual gun. I think most people would say that this is a increasing in effectiveness, or at least most people would probably agree with that. And they would probably look at this as a progression, like this to this to this to this. But the way I look at it is that this is actually two separate categories. You have these up here, and then these down here. And I think almost every type of self-defense tool you can get, including the little keychain Kubotan, actually falls into the second category here, which is actually more of like an offensive tool. And while it may not be as effective, like this thing is actually, this little Kubotan is actually going to be less effective than a pepper spray or a stun gun in many situations, but I think it still falls in the same category. And more importantly, it falls in the same category in legally, in like the way most people perceive them, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. And well, right now actually, why wait? Something like this, it's not going to be very effective necessarily, as even compared to a pepper spray, but when you're using something like this, it's automatically perceived that you're attempting to damage the person. So while you're probably not going to kill them, you could, and you could seriously injure them. So even though this is less effective than the pepper spray, there's a lot less situations that you would be justified in using something like this than you would in using something like a pepper spray. And I think that's what a mistake a lot of people make, is that they think that because something's less effective, like starting with their fists, they think there's a lot more situations that they could use, you know, unarmed combat, or like a pen or something like that, or just striking with anything before using something like a pepper spray or a stun gun, just because it's less effective. But it all comes back to the way it's perceived. Like if you pepper spray someone, even if they died from that, it is almost automatically and universally assumed that when you're using something like pepper spray or stun guns, and it's pretty much limited to those two, pepper sprays and stun gun, that you are doing so in a defensive manner. These are just universally looked at as a defensive tool. Whether you're using them offensively or not, it has a much better public perception than something like a Kubotan, or certainly something like a knife. People think you're a lunatic if you're trying to, you know, attack someone with a knife. And just even if you're justified in using it, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do in most situations. So I would never even use something like this, or certainly something like this, unless you would be morally and legally justified in using this, because they're all in the same category, and that is something that certainly could kill them, and at least it's going to look like you were trying to kill them regardless. So that's one of the reasons that I always recommend people carry pepper spray or stun gun, but specifically pepper spray, is because, first of all, it works. Second of all, it doesn't have all the limitations that carrying a firearm does. There are some, but there's not nearly as many. And it's looked at a whole lot differently from a legal sense. Like if someone even jumped out at a surprise birthday party and you just pepper spray them, then you're probably not going to get in any trouble. I mean, if you could just convince people to think that you were actually scared and you used your pepper spray, you're probably free to go. And even if you used a pepper spray maliciously, like you just, like the person who, there was a Black Friday case where someone pepper sprayed someone because they wanted the DVDs or something like that. It's probably going to be a lot less harsh than if they even struck them one time with their hand, or certainly if they used an implement like a Kubotan, or God forbid a knife or a gun or something like that. So just the way that pepper spray and tasers are perceived is so much better legally that I always recommend using it, because although I agree with the adage that it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, it's preferable to not have to deal with either situation. And there's plenty of situations. In fact, I would guess that more self-defense situations fit in the category that you have to do something, but you're not yet justified in using lethal force. And don't get me wrong, like, you know, this would fall under lethal force. You should not ever use something like this unless you're justified in using lethal force. So in the future, I think I'm going to post some videos or link to some videos from like movie clips and different scenarios and see what people think about what you should do in that situation, because there's tons of situations where you get that bad vibe, maybe people are like surrounding you or something, but they haven't really done anything yet, or maybe they haven't even done anything illegal yet. You just got that feeling, and you know you have to do something. And that's where something like pepper spray is really good, because you could do something, even if it turns out later that you weren't justified, you're going to be in a whole lot less trouble than if you use something like a gun and it turns out you weren't justified, or a knife and it turns out you were justified, or even just punching them and it turns out you weren't justified, because it's just the way it's perceived. And not to mention, you can get multiple assailants with a pepper spray, and it's completely debilitating. I haven't actually been pepper sprayed. I've been tear gassed, but I haven't, and that was bad enough. But I've heard that pepper spray is actually worse and lasts longer. So maybe I'll do a video where I'm testing this stuff out on myself. That's for another time. But yeah, just so you guys know, I just wanted to go cover that most people view these things as a progression, like from the smaller things up to the gun, when really it's all just the same category. And it's good to have these extra weapons in case for some reason you have to try and use lethal force and you can't get to your gun or whatever, but don't look at it as being a lesser version of self-defense just because it's less effective. It is in the exact same category. So make sure you have some legitimate non-lethal self-defense, as well as what would fall in the category of lethal self-defense, and it'll save you, it'll actually improve your capabilities in terms of self-defense, and it'll have a lot to do with you coming out the other side without any legal troubles, or at least minimal legal troubles. So I hope that helped you guys, and if you guys have any comments, or if there's something else you wanted me to go into on this topic, I know I've been kind of rambling on it, but that's what I do. So leave your comments, rate, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.